Chapter 2. The White Light. Theo's apartment. February 22, 2022. 9:14 p.m. On the wooden coffee table was a half-full bottle of Jack Daniels, with its distinctive square shape and black and white label, a bowl of ice, almost empty and with too much water in the bottom, a smaller bowl full of lime wedges, over half of them had been squeezed of all their juice, and a red shoe. It looked similar to a ballet slipper but had a small heel. The flickering, changing light of television pictures stirred the room. Theo relaxed back into his sofa, popped his feet onto the table, exhaled deeply and took another sip of his drink. The ice danced against his top lip and the Jack warmed the back of his throat as it went down. He was freshly showered after the majority of the day spent at the hospital seeing doctors, New York cops, FBI agents and some guys who didn't announce where they were from. He had told the same story 20 times that day, and each time he played down claims he was a hero. They showed him photos of a selection of young Muslim men, and Theo was able to identify the student whom had affected his day so dramatically. He wondered what would drive someone to do such a thing. To rip their body apart for their cause. Theo had always loved the phrase that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Since he had heard it one night when debating Israel-Palestine issues with his childhood crush and babysitter, Emma Hartridge. All stories had two sides, and he always felt if someone dropped a bomb on his family, he would probably want some sort of revenge too. He remembered the passion with which she defended the Palestinian cause. These young men were soldiers fighting against the administration, but the power of their enemy was such that their only way to hurt them was to attack the structure of the core of the powers they fight to resist. Since then, he had envied their conviction, the fact that they believed in something so much they were willing to die for it. It reminded him of conflicts of the past, when people were willing to die for something they believed in. The American Revolution was the most relevant example he could think of. Now, however, having lived through it, he wasn't so sure if it was envy or hatred he felt. He was so numb he couldn't tell. He flicked the channel. The story of the bombing and the disruption it caused had been at the forefront of every news channel's daily coverage. Just on cue, the 9:30 NBC coverage was not about to buck the trend and miss out on this ratings gem. Theo turned up the volume. Phrases like links to Al-Qaeda, red alert, 9/11, homegrown, were thrown around by reporters, presidential spokesmen and so-called experts. Then they played their trump card. It appeared that one of the passengers from the rear carriages had recorded the aftermath of the attack on his mobile phone. The anchor man warned it would show images that were unsuitable for children, which everyone interpreted as essential viewing. The screen filled with the image of the tunnel, bouncing around in time to the footsteps of the cameraman. A young man that was visiting his grandmother in New York from California apparently. His picture appeared in a small box at the top left of the screen over the video as it played out. He started speaking and his excitement was evident in the speed and pitch of his voice. He began to tell of his horror at hearing an explosion, completely out of nowhere, followed by the lurching and pitching of the train, the screams of the passengers, then the hideous sound of grinding metal being thrown from his seat and tossed around, and then stillness and groans. Theo had stopped listening before he broke into his tale of the Superman who just kept pulling people out of the train. He had put his feet down, leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees and was looking at the screen, brow creased, a questioning look in his eyes. The shot was mostly still now, just lifting and dropping slightly as Phil Hart from Wisconsin CA breathed deeply. The scene was one straight from any good Hollywood blockbuster movie. Smoke was illuminated by the subway tunnel's emergency lighting system, and lighting in all the train carriages was sporadically trying to flicker to life. Everything, man, woman and machine, were enveloped in a small halo of light and dust. The camera was slowly panning from one side of the tunnel to the other, gleefully taking in the carnage up ahead and all around it. It stopped its rotation and gradually zoomed forward to the carriage. It was on its left side and, due to the force of the explosion, in Phil's expert opinion, had, listed onto its left side, broken free of the front carriages, twisted to the left, bounced and scrapped along the left tunnel wall, before coming to an inevitable and devastating end to its journey. His excitement almost threatened to spill over, but he tried in vain to hide it behind the voice of a true American reporter, strong and confident. He even signed off with, "Phil Hart. NBC." Diane? On any other day, given any other set of circumstances, Theo would have found that "Try Hard, Phil Hart" hilarious. But today his heart stopped, his mouth went dry as flour, and the ringing he heard earlier returned. What Phil Hart from Wisconsin failed to report on, was the small white ball of light rising like a phoenix from the same flames of carriage 0438-2 that Theo had navigated. Every second it was in frame on its ascent to, and through the tunnel rooftop. Theo had been unable to breathe. It wasn't that he couldn't, he just didn't want to. Now this ball of whatever it was gone, and had been as obvious to him as a siren on the rocks, and yet no one had mentioned it. Theo questioned his drink with a glance, like the owner of a new puppy who finds a wet spot. "Time for bed," he said out loud. He looked over his shoulder at the red slipper on his table and took a moment before he flicked the light and left for his bedroom.